G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. We're going to have an update on the wicked campers that I put a video of up last week.
For us on the listener line, 02 8333 1430, 02 8333 1430. Always keen to hear what you're thinking about. Now, if you've ever been on the road behind a wicked camper van, you may have found yourself infuriated by some of the words and images spray painted onto these vans. You might have even had kids in the car and struggled to explain the sometimes offensive concepts. And a warning, if you do have kids around you, this conversation may include some of those messages and why we find them offensive. Here's just a few. Virginity is curable. A wife is an attachment you screw to the bed to get the housework done. There's a few more. I really can't read those. I'm sorry. But what might surprise you is that attempts to get these messages off our roads have been relatively futile here in Australia. But in New Zealand, some creative thinking and a determined public campaign may be making a difference. In a moment, we're going to cross the Tasman and hear about that. But first, let's hear from Federal Greens Senator for Queensland, Larissa Waters, who put forward a motion back in 2014 condemning the slogans and images that appear on the side of wicked vans. I spoke to her just a little earlier. Firstly, thanks for talking with us.
Absolute pleasure, Kathy.
Now, you've got a lot of history with this issue. How did you get involved with it?
Look, it's hard to believe it was almost 2 years ago, Kathy, when I had an email from a mum in New South Wales who had been driving along the road and seen one of these awful slogans on a wicked camper van, which her little 11-year-old daughter had said, "Mummy, what does that mean?" And the hideous slogan was, "In every princess, there's a little slut who just wants to try it once." Obviously, princesses mean something different to children, and she had rightly been confused. And Paula, to her credit, then decided she'd take on this, abominable outfit and started a petition which went viral and got many, many tens of thousands of signatures on it, and came to the attention of the federal parliament when I said to Paula, yes, I'll put a motion into the Senate condemning these sorts of sexist, misogynistic and racist slogans and call on wicked campers to remove them. And I was very pleased that the Senate unanimously passed that motion, which was in July of 2014. And I then wrote to wicked campers and said, well, the Senate is condemning this sort of vilification. Can you commit to removing these slogans? And the CEO publicly said that in 6 months he would make sure that those most offensive slogans were removed. And we thought, great, we've had a win. Of course, knowing that that commitment was pretty much unenforceable. And now, sadly, over the subsequent almost 2 years, we keep hearing anecdotal evidence that those sorts of slogans are still on these vans. And looking into the legals of it, it's really hard to know how you can fix this problem because they sort of skate in between all of our existing laws. And even though I think they're totally out of step with community standards, it's actually, at the moment, it doesn't seem like it's against the law.
Unfortunately, they seem to be advertising or targeting a demographic that also feels that it's out of step with a lot of community sentiment. So in that way, it's very successful. And of course, the trap of even this conversation we're having now is that we're providing publicity for this company.
Well, and that's exactly the problem. And many people have chosen not to speak out for that very reason. But you can't let this kind of rampant sexism go unchallenged. You can't think that if you just ignore it, it will go away.
So in 2014, in July, this motion was passed in the Queensland Senate. Letters were then written to the CEO, John Webb. He said there'd be a review over 6 months. Is there any evidence that any of those slogans were removed?
Well, this is the disturbing thing. So the federal Senate passed a motion that condemned those slogans, and that's something that applies nationally. I then wrote...
So that was at his discretion, what they would be?
Well, that's right. Who's to say what's sensitive? Clearly, they're all pretty insensitive, but what we're concerned about is the ones that actually incite violence against women and children. And so I wrote to him again in February of last year, so a good sort of 7 months after the initial interest, and unfortunately I've had absolutely no response. Now, he's not obliged to respond to me, but I think it's a real shame when the community's spoken out, when the federal senator's spoken out saying this is an unacceptable way of referring to women or children, and this company knows that it can get away with it because the laws are inadequate and apparently continues to do so.
Now, there was another case, Lucy Clark, who was an editor of the now defunct website, The Hoopla. She raised the concerns that you've already mentioned about the Princess slogan. The company then put a van out on the street in the area where Lucy Clark lived, saying, "Dear Lucy, I can already imagine the gaffer tape on your mouth." Now, she contacted the company. The CEO said it was done without his knowledge and that it would be removed. She also contacted the Advertising Standards Board, and I guess this is the other part of it. They seem to be quite toothless in being able to enforce any complaints that they actually uphold against this company.
Well, that's exactly right. And for a start, such a reaction to legitimate criticism in the media by a journalist is utterly outrageous. But in terms of the regulation, the Advertising Standards Bureau are toothless. It's industry self-regulation, and in some cases they do a very good job, but there's no way of actually enforcing their rulings. And there's one argument where you can say that these vans actually aren't even advertising because they're effectively just slogans on vans that the company owns themselves. They're not, for example, purchasing a billboard or purchasing an ad on TV, which is clearly advertising. So they sort of fall between the cracks. And what we've been looking at is the anti-discrimination laws around the country. Every state has one. And in Queensland, there's rules that say, you can't discriminate against people on the basis of their gender or their race or their religion and what have you. But there's also then rules that say you shouldn't vilify people at any time, not just if you're in an employment relationship with them. But interestingly, vilification on just about every other basis, but vilification on the basis of gender is not. Now, the Queensland government has said that they will review those laws, and we've welcomed that review because clearly we need to add gender vilification to that list of conduct that we don't deem appropriate.
Do you think that would be desirable? I actually think that half of the joking conversations that women might have in an office might vilify men on the basis of gender. Men don't do the washing up, men don't put the toilet seat down, whatever. Isn't the suggestion of including gender in vilification actually a slippery
both ways? Well, I'm sure it should cut both ways. That's the whole point about vilification on the basis of gender. It should apply equally. But I think it's like the people that say you shouldn't have International Women's Day because they want an International Man's Day. Well, it's your day every other day of the year. I'm afraid we've got ingrained sexism, and we need to fix it. And one of the ways of fixing it is calling out this sort of sexist slogans. And of course, they don't have any slogans that vilify men on these camper vans, at least not that I've seen. And we need to update our laws so that vilification, and it's not just, jokes, but actual vilification is pretty serious discrimination and derogatory comments that causes others to, hate or abhor you. So it's pretty serious stuff. It's not just, you've got to put the toilet seat down again, which they so often do. It goes far beyond that. And I think it's about time that our laws recognise that sexism is not okay and that we have a systemic problem here that we are working to address, but that progress has been very slow. We still have a long way to go. When you've got camper vans that can drive past schools or be spotted by kids on the street that talk about women as sex objects, and inciting violence against women, that goes too far.
It should be noted, actually, that the former Human Rights Commissioner, Tim Wilson, is on the record saying it's perfectly legal for this to happen, and if people don't like it, they have the option to boycott the company.
Well, I think that does illustrate that the laws need to be updated. And I will grant that there is an argument there about free speech, and that's an important one to have. And we do need to draw the line in a way that we're not impinging on free speech. That is an important consideration. But I think when you've got a slogan that actually incites violence and incites a crime, for me, that's a step too far.
We're talking with Senator Larissa Waters about the wicked campers that you may well have seen around the roads around Australia. It's an Australian company. It's now been exported. Africa, South America, there's New Zealand, of course. But many of these jurisdictions have found it difficult to enforce rules against the slogans that many people and the images find offensive. New Zealand's doing something interesting. They've banned wicked campers from government-owned caravan parks. They're also looking at telling big companies like Disney and Coke and Pepsi about the way their images are being used on these vans, and hoping that their intellectual property rights departments will kick into gear. Is this the next wave of action?
Oh, look, I think that's a wonderful idea, and obviously New Zealand's got a different regulatory system to us, and I don't know if Australia's got any government-owned caravan parks. I'm not too sure about that.
Parks, maybe.
Yeah, well, national parks, let's hope that they're not letting wicked camper vans into national parks. But look, I really laud the efforts of New Zealand to take these company on, because as you say, it's not just Queensland, it's not just Australia. They're now expanding out to many other countries. And I mean, I think people who find those slogans offensive indeed should and will boycott those vans. But I'm pleased that governments around the world appear to be trying to address this kind of vilification and incitement of violence.
Thank you very much for talking with us today,
My
Senator.
pleasure.
That's Senator Larissa Waters, a Federal Greens Senator for Queensland. Now, as we've been discussing, the New Zealand situation is moving along quite quickly. And one of the things they've been doing is a public campaign spearheaded by our next guest, Simon Barnett. He's on the line from New Zealand. He's half of Si and Gary, the breakfast presenters on More FM in New Zealand radio. He's leading this campaign. Good morning, Simon.
Okay, I'm going to start a part 2 on this because I'm nearly out of time on this upload limit.